Thank you very much, James, and a very good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to be present here after yesterday's amazing gala. I'd like to first start by thanking our partners, the AFCM, and our host, Qatar Stock Exchange, for a great lineup of panelists and agenda that's been piled up over the course of 2 days. This is Marwa AlMaskati joining you from Bahrain Bourse, and the title of our panel today is The Global IR Revolution, Transforming IR with the Power of IRO and the Emergence of AI. And allow me to please introduce our great panelists here with me. Next to me is Paolo Casamassima, CEO of the Middle East Investor Relations Association of EMEA. Oskar Yasar, Managing Partner at Broome Yasar Partnerships. Amani Korayeim, Director of EMEA at Institutional Investor Research. And Mr. Ayman Taha, Advisor to the Chairman at the Egyptian Exchange. So today's session is focused on IR and AI, and we've seen AI resonating well across yesterday's panels and different perspectives and aspects. So my first question to you, Oskar, is, in light of the most recent IR Magazine AI conference, can you add some color on the AI opportunity within IR space and whether artificial intelligence will replace investor relations officer in the future? In other words, will it replace or augment the role of the IR officer?
Before I commence, can I take this opportunity to thank you for moderating what I'm sure is going to be a great panel this morning. We also want to use this opportunity to thank the Qatar Exchange for putting on what has been quite an outstanding, incredibly ambitious conference full of sophistication and forward-thinking attitude. And so congratulations to both the Federation as well as the Qatar Stock Exchange. I think what's really clear from yesterday's conference, and I'm sure later today, is this revolution in the concept of investor relations and the transformation in the understanding and the appreciation of financial capital markets awareness within the investor community. I think what's also been clear is the realization by executive boards of the impact of investor relations on their communications with the financial capital markets. And part of that has been the adaptation to new technology. We've had obviously ESG and sustainability and regulations and a whole plethora of new global regulations that companies and societies and organizations have had to adhere with. And because of that landscape, I think the role of IR has also been transformed because of the realization by a number of high-powered executive boards of the power of investor relations, not just investor relations, but how reputation is now part of a company's strategic relationship with the financial capital markets. And as we know, IR is no longer, we talked about this the other day, IR is no longer just a process. It's about reputation, and process is one important element of that. But what's also happened is a perfect storm, I think, has been created in that there's been an influx of highly sophisticated and ambitious investor relations officers that are coming in, who are not only the eyes and the ears of the CEOs and the CFOs, but they're also sometimes proxy CFOs. And there has been a recent realization of the next stage of development of communications with the markets, and AI is a significant part of that realignment. But what's also been interesting is the impact of AI on how organizations communicate to the financial capital market stakeholders. And this has been absolutely clear in a number of interviews. We are the leading global IR headhunter. I've helped to appoint more than 550 directors of IR globally, and we've seen the realization that AI is now playing a critical part in a company's positioning with the capital markets. And to answer your question also, that will AI take over the role of IR? I fundamentally don't believe it will, but you have to understand that those that understand AI will invariably take over from your role. And a short little, very quick anecdote. I started my career 30 years ago in PR, public relations advisory, and we had a big client and we launched something which at the time no one really knew about, and that was called the internet through our client that was AOL America Online. And that was only 30 years ago. And the significant transformation that we've noticed with the internet has obviously catapulted how individuals communicate. I am absolutely 100% certain that AI will transform the role of investor relations, and I think we're just really at the foothills of what I consider to be the Mount Everest of an opportunity to advance communications within the investor relations arena.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Oskar. Before we move on to the next question, may I please ask the audience to scan the QR codes on your badges? There's a live poll, and we have a question over here. The question is, do you think that the growth of AI technology will augment or disrupt potential career growth for IR professionals within the industry? We'll see the results at the end of our panel. Appreciate if you can just participate by scanning the badges, the back side of your badges, please. So staying with you, Oskar, my next question is on AI and ChatGPT. What IROs and senior management should know about the opportunities available within that space, and how do you introduce AI to IR systems, and how does it impact investor relations in terms of output and the career trajectory for those within it? Can you share some input with us on the use cases for AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's three particular areas, and the first area is the realization by boards of the importance of reputation. That is now critical. Once you understand that reputation is an integral part of a board strategy, then I think it's easier to communicate to the markets. There's been a significant opportunity with the positioning of IR at the board level, because boards are still scared about the impact of AI on their business. So when you have these highly sophisticated, ambitious, forward-thinking IROs that are bringing in AI at the board level conversation, that is when the role and the power of IR is catapulted at the board level. There are several examples. It was, I think, recent IR Magazine Awards in New York, where I was attending, also the AI Summit, the IR Magazine Summit in London recently, showcased that those IR teams that are putting in best practice AI programs are far and away much better at communicating to their investor stakeholders. And this is, again, a case study was Moody's, who were awarded the most number of awards at the nominations at the IR Magazine Awards, because they have spent an enormous amount of budget on creating an AI program to strengthen the reputation of the board. That comes from three areas. Firstly, it's about maximizing efficiency. So, as we know, IR is about data. It's about data analysis, about communicating data. But if you can have an AI program that's going to significantly shorten the amount of time it takes to process that data, that's a big tick in the box. Secondly, also, there's what we call a toolkit now in place that, I mean, again, what's really exciting is Microsoft now have bespoke IR programs through AI. They can create a bespoke IR program from scratch, which means that before you potentially go in to meet an investor or an analyst, AI can create not just an understanding of what the type of questions are likely to ask, but the consensus that goes around that as well. And the final area is how CEOs and CFOs are now bringing in much more powerful IR teams, increasing budgets because of the awareness that they know that their careers are now dependent on how they communicate. 20 years ago, when I was advising big companies on their strategic communications, CEOs and CFOs just got on with their day jobs, and now CEOs and CFOs, particularly in America, UK, and Europe, they realize that their careers are now dependent on how they communicate. And AI is a significant part of that realization.
Interesting. Moving on to Amani, I think both you and I add some visual color to this panel, but adding more,
I got the memo, they didn't.
but adding more contextual color to the conversation. Do you foresee that the AI will eventually become part of the IR's role toolkit in the very near future? If yes, how will it augment the role of IROs as we know it today?
Yeah, thank you, Marwa. And also, I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you for AFCM to inviting me here along, and congratulations to AFCM and the Qatar Exchange for a fantastic conference so far, and I'm sure it's going to get better as we're going along. Well, thank you for the question. I think Oskar pretty much covered it all, haven't you?
Oh, no. I'm sure you've got lots more to cover.
A little bit, but I think the short answer to your question is yes. I mean, it will massively augment investor relations to the same points that Oskar has mentioned. It's really about increasing efficiency. I think the key thing to investor relation has always been to establish and develop strong and robust relationships with their stakeholders, and whatever can actually help to increase that and to reinforce that is really, really important from a trust, from a credibility and consistency point of view. Now, when we think about level of adoption and how fast this is happening, I think this is a very individual thing. Every company is at a different stage in terms of technological adoption generally. But I think, if you already have a company that has a strong technological infrastructure, we've seen that companies are much quicker at adopting AI custom-made tools. I met recently a company that has actually designed and created a custom platform through which they're actually generating all the content and all the qualitative responses for their ESG rating reports. Now, this is a huge endeavor for investor relations, and it also involves other teams on the ESG side. So it obviously, by being able to utilize and deploy such a tool, you're saving a lot of time. As Oskar said, it's really about efficiency, and you're also giving time back to the investor relations function to actually focus on their strategic role and the strategic function that they're actually increasingly now focusing on as part of the corporate function. So in terms of, I guess, clear advantage, we're seeing the time element, so getting rid of a lot of mundane kind of tasks, but also from a creative standpoint, you have the ability to create much faster, much more compelling content, which in a market like this is really quite important to help you distinguish yourself from the rest of the peers that you're competing for capital with. So it's really important that whatever you're producing to the market is of value to your customers, and your customers are your stakeholders, your investors, your sell-side analyst. And I think it also allows you, deploying the right kind of tools to take a specific KYC approach. So again, think about, what your investors want, what their requirements are, what their preferences are, to be able to capture very specific profile-related elements about the people that you're engaging with will be hugely advantageous in terms of targeting them, in terms of engaging with them and providing them with the right kind of material. So, and in addition to that, you're obviously also in a market where you may be facing liquidity issues, or you're not covered by enough sell-side analysts. You have the ability to obviously use different platforms, to create that necessary multiplier effect and to distribute your equity story, your investment case really wide and far. And that's also really quite critical in terms of investor engagement and using your time efficiently. So for those that know us, they will know that we're currently actually undergoing our Developed Europe and Emerging EMEA executive research. And part of this research, we're also canvassing and scoping the feedback from corporate heads of IR around their best practices, around their processes, their workflows. And we did also include we've been actually tracking it for a while, but we did include a very important questions around AI, to what extent they're actually already using it. So far, this research is ongoing, so the results are preliminary, but we had over 311 companies actually respond to this question. Interestingly enough, 148 corporate heads of IR said that they're not using AI. So you can see the hesitation still there, and it's clearly the majority. We had over 121, I need to now read those numbers, 121 that are actually considering deploying AI, and 42 that have actually used it. So, and when we now, to answer also your question, when we now look at what they're using, we're kind of breaking AI into various buckets. So one is looking at market intelligence and competitor intelligence. We're looking at content creation and content syndication, data verification and compliance checks, strategic investor relations tools, and then finally interaction and communication with the market. And for those that actually said that they are using AI, we see a large majority are actually focused on content creation and syndication, so that's about 40%. And content creation and syndication is really looking at, your press releases, your financial disclosure, your investor presentation, any kind of real-time video content that you're producing, again, to create a much more accessible story, crafting of equity stories, which I think is really, really important to understand what your investment case is and really creating a compelling story around that. And then also the other element that is really quite paramount is 38% are really focusing on market intelligence. So this is really, really key, because this is looking at obviously your peers, how they're operating, what they are doing. It's looking at real-time stock monitoring. It's looking at consensus management. So you have various aspects of market sentiment, including also sentiment analysis around C-suite boards, how they're behaving, how they're engaging, the level of what language that they're using, the intonation. All of that is actually also used by the buy side, by the investor community, to understand the level of credibility individuals have, the level of leadership qualities they bring. So it's important that obviously IR adopts the same kind of approaches. And we see, for those that actually responded considering it, we're seeing the same kind of trends. So these two buckets are really quite paramount in terms of their engagement and interaction, and really improving AI in IR.
That's very interesting, because the figures that you've just mentioned are interesting, because there's always a hesitancy to adopt generative AI tools, mainly because some claim that the results are wide and narrow and shallow and not focused enough. Maybe because it's not bespoke AI generative tools. They're general tools such as ChatGPT or others. So what are the risks, some of the common risks of AI-powered content tools for AI professionals? Oskar touched upon that slightly, but from your perspective, why is there hesitancy on those tools?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like, AI is presenting so many opportunities for investor relations, there are obviously a huge amount of risk associated with the implementation of it. Obviously, there's a clear security and data privacy issue with AI. And I think this is a really important aspect. So for any technological, workflows or implementation, I think it needs to be a bottom-up kind of approach that really goes across businesses in terms of creating a very robust policy framework to implement AI, because there's so many still publicly available AI tools for content creation, content syndication, that if you're using it in the wrong way, that can really be really disastrous for the reputation of the company, circulating misinformation and wrong data, but also circulating sensitive data. So where IR is really surrounded by compliance and sensitive data, it's really, really important that this is ring-fenced. And I think right now, from a governance standpoint and just a compliance standpoint, we're not seeing a unified framework in place yet, a global unified framework. And obviously compliance is related to laws, to guidelines, standards, policies that are operating on a national and international level. And to bring that kind of convergence is not easy, but it's really quite essential, because what we've seen on ESG, and I'm sure there are quite a few ESG experts here, is a lot of mistakes, had been made before actually, frameworks were put in place, and legislation and policies. So I think you kind of want to approach, the framework of AI with a much more proactive and anticipatory kind of approach, as opposed to detecting, issues and challenges and problems and being more responsive. So I think it's really important, that the communities come together in that sense, to be able to mitigate risk as opposed to kind of deal with the risk when it's happened. So I think this is really, really important. And then, of course, to your point about sort of the data as well, if you're not accessing to create your models, to create your algorithms, comprehensive enough data, then you're obviously leading to, much greater risk of having very, biased kind of results from the data, whether it's on actually the investor side, they using specific financial models to, spew out some investment decision criteria, or on the IR side, it's the same thing. So I think these are really, really important aspects. But I think, I think for me the biggest thing is really about creating a very robust framework. Any kind of inconsistencies around, how markets are engaging with each other, how companies are engaging with each other, how companies are engaging with their stakeholders, can lead to very ineffective engagement. And then we're talking later about this. I think the lack of transparency, accountability, and responsibility that is resulted out of that could be quite detrimental. I mean, we've seen an example, I think last year, I believe it was an airline company where a customer was trying through a chatbot, piece of information to buy tickets, and they were promised to be able to be refunded through this chatbot communication, and the company then later on said, no, they're not refunding it, and the company basically discarded any kind of connection to this chatbot that is on their website, so they have nothing to do with it. It's an independent piece of, data that is generated, which is, inconceivable if you think that they can actually say, we have nothing to do with it. So I think those kind of, incidents will actually set precedents, and then, we will create sort of specific frameworks around that.
Thank you, that's fantastic. Paolo, allow me to pick your brains on the same thoughts. What are some of the common risks of AI-powered content tools for our IR professionals that you foresee from your perspective?
Thank you, Marwa. First of all, thank you, AFCM and QX, for the excellent conference. Allow me to say that the word risk, I've realized yesterday, is seen by certain AI tools as one of those words that trigger further negativity from AI tools. So you should use the word challenges as opposed to risks. Now, in terms of risks, first and foremost, I think in preparing for this chat, I have spoken to some of the members of the Middle East IR Association that I represent. We are the go-to professional body for investor relation officers. And some of the IROs have already shared with me some of their concerns from the use of AI. So first, for example, in preparing for meetings with investors, online meetings, they have realized the use of this AI tools that already transcribe their calls. And the transcriptions are not always accurate. At the end of the call, you usually don't really get the transcript of what's been said. And the AI tool, as Amani mentioned, can actually pick up certain words that are looking at the sentiment, how you're feeling about certain things that you're saying, and can trigger potentially negativity and sell signals based on simply your emotions and how you've been speaking over the phone. There are certainly some issues in respect to the data that are created by these AI tools, but I refer more about the data that the buy side is using. So the buy side previously, for example, was comparing a stock against 30 peers, 50 peers. The AI tool can now compare the stock against 2,000 peers from the investment universe, perhaps of the telecom sector. And the output can be quite scary because you have the risk that your stock has already been blacklisted for certain reasons that you're not aware of, and you cannot do anything to overcome that. But that's exactly when the IR person is empowered, because the IR ultimately is the communicator, is the face of the company. And that's when IR becomes even more important, because he's the one that will bring the story, the equity story, back onto the picture. But I would like to say that there are, on the other hand, opportunities, a lot of opportunities. I personally see more opportunities than threats. Certain professions, I believe, will cease to exist, or there will be a number of redundancies. But I think that for the investor relation profession, there's a lot more opportunities. So there is a survey that was recently done by Citygate. They've interviewed over 150 professionals, investor relation professionals globally. Only 28% is doing purely IR-related tasks. So the remaining 70%, 72% is actually doing a lot of admin and non-IR-related tasks, which, of course, with the use of AI, can be automated, giving the time back to the IR person to focus on what is relevant. And this is, many things could be content creation, making presentations look standard, so making sure that all the logos and the format are in the right place. Where IROs, they used to spend hours going through the presentations, and now the AI tool does it all for you. There are targeting tools that help you to identify the potential investors that are invested in your peers but not in you, and that perhaps have the right P ratio or return on investment that will make sure that you can talk to that investor with the confidence that he will be interested in your stock. So again, I think there are a number of opportunities other than risks.
Thank you, Paolo. Moving on to Ayman, if I can also pick your brains. Can investor relations and AI technology be a game-changing tool for modern businesses? And will robo-IRs replace power IR? More specifically speaking, do you think AI will eventually become part of the IR's rule toolkit? Will it replace or augment the IROs?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for AFCM and Qatar Exchange for having us. About the Power IR and the Robo IR, I don't think that the Robo IR will replace the IR officers or the Power IR. Yet I think they will complement, assist, augment their roles. Because actually the key word for the IR is communication. I have been working before joining EGX, I have been working as IR for like 15 years. So the key work is communicating to the stakeholders. The word communication has its own, personal or human touch that cannot be replaced by AI. So AI will help us save time, money, and effort. It will help the IR officers to analyze data, compile data, present data more effectively and more efficiently, but it will not replace them. It will become part of the toolkit, but it will not replace the Power IR. I will give you a practical example. If we are going to an investment forum or investment conference. So the IR, one of the IR main roles is to prepare earning presentation or IR presentation. Here, the AI can help the IR officer to collect data either from inside the company or from the market, to analyze data, to compile the data, to present them in a very attractive and efficient presentation. But again, the IR officer has to go through the presentation to double check the facts and the numbers and the words used. And after that, he has to do the presentation himself or herself. There is this, human touch. They have to go to the conference and to present the presentation and to discuss the presentation with the other side. This cannot be done by the AI. So I think the Robo IR will not replace the Power IR, but what will replace the Power IR is another IR officer that can efficiently and effectively use in a smart way the AI.
Great. Thank you, Ayman. Paolo, if I can circle back to you, picking up on Ayman's point, do you foresee that the AI will be a job creator or a job killer, specifically within the context of investor relations?
So from the last point, first of all, the IR that knows how to use AI will be having an edge against other IROs. But I think the risk is not really related from the IR industry, but it's more from parallel industries. So we've seen an influx of sell-side analysts after MiFID II in Europe was implemented within the role of IR. Now, the analyst role I have seen and I've read are some of the more under threat roles through AI, because AI will speed up the process of analyzing data that the analysts used to do. So it is possible that some of the sell-side analysts that are obviously very good at numbers can try to transit inside investor relation, and that can be a further threat to the IR as opposed to within IR, AI being a threat. In general, I think it is a job creator as opposed to a threat. And what we need to consider is that the fund management industry have seen the rise of passive investment over the years. And with AI, it is likely to increase further. Now, the active managers, and many of them, I think that I've read a statistic that 25 to 30% of US fund managers have underperformed their relative passive index. The best fund managers will be those that will be able to include ESG, as well as obviously knowing AI, they will be able to data crunch a lot more data compared to other fund managers. But ultimately, where do you get the best trading ideas is by speaking to people, right? So I believe that the stocks that will have an edge and that will overperform the market are the stocks where the investor relation professional will be able to really get hold of the fund managers and speak to them. And those are the investor relation officers that also will be able to speak to the fund managers because they have more to speak about. So I'm speaking about better disclosure from publicly listed companies. More and more disclosure will be required because the AI tools will be continuously generating research and data points, and the investor relation officer is the one that will be the point of contact for that. So again, I see more of an opportunity than a threat.
Thank you, Paolo. Going back to you, Amani, since you've touched upon the regulations aspect. In March of this year, we've seen the EU adopting a landmark law, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, which basically looks to safely harness the use of AI across Europe and aims to impose a tiered and risk-based approach to regulation. This comes as part of EU's digital strategy in which it aims to regulate the case usage of AI to ensure better conditions for the development and use of this innovative technology. Since you've touched upon this context, although it may be too early in terms of adoption of governance cycle, but can you add some context to foreseeing any potential AI impacting transparency, investor relations, and the regulatory aspect of AI?
Yeah, multiple things, I think. I mean, transparency, like in disclosure, is absolutely key. I think, you know, everything really starts with transparency and consistency of communication and information disclosure, and that kind of also establishes the trust that you have with your stakeholders and the credibility that you have as a company. So I think in terms of AI, I think it can be a minefield, again, unless you have very specific guidelines and policies around that. But you can already see that some companies, when they're actually, you know, creating content, when they're, you know, creating certain, you know, communication collateral, that very deliberately they actually create, you know, certain limitations around word usages or phrases, so it wouldn't be included as part of their disclosure. So they're, you know, always, you know, presenting the company in the best light, and I think that can, you know, obviously lead to, again, you know, a whole distribution of misinformation and fake information that is really quite distorted because it's very, you know, it creates like a biased kind of overview. So I think in terms of, you know, transparency, you need to be able to also disclose when you're using AI. I think this is really, really important. On the other hand, I do believe that if you are on a conference call and, you know, you have a script that is being prepared by AI or an auto cue that is kind of prompting you with responses, you know, if you are announcing the use of that, I don't know how actually investors, if anyone are in the room, how they would actually genuinely feel about that in terms of, you know, the truthfulness of the information, the authenticity of the information. So I think these are all aspects that, you know, that you need to consider as part of this whole, you know, being transparent and being open about what you're doing and how you're doing. But I think it's certainly important that you're very clear around the algorithms that you're doing, the data that you're accessing to create certain content and information and disclosure is obviously really critical for disclosure. So I think transparency around that is absolutely critical for any company. But, you know, it's how you navigate that, how to announce that, you know, I think we're still to be seen, to be honest.
Thank you, Amani. I'll address my last question to Ayman. If you can add the context in terms of, while we realize that companies are recognizing investor demand for transparency and security, and navigating regulations could be a real challenge, especially for smaller teams. Can you shed some light on this topic from EGX's perspective in terms of regulation?
Actually, the journey of the Egyptian exchange with the IR witnessed a huge evolvement in the last 20 years. EGX started first by encouraging companies to establish or to have an IR department and IR officer. I think 10 years ago, the Egyptian exchange took one step further, and it made it mandatory for every company to have IR officer, not only encouraging, but it became mandatory, and EGX started not to accept any communication from any listed company except through this IR officer. Last year, actually, we took another step further, and it was actually initiated by Mr. Rami when he was our chairman. We decided, at the Egyptian Exchange, decided to make the IR job licensed. It's one of the jobs that before anybody can do it or execute it, he has to get a license from the Egyptian Exchange. In the last few months, we made interviews for all the IR officers in the market. Those who passed will get the license very soon. Those who didn't, we asked them to go through an extensive 6-day course. It's an integrated IR course with 40 plus training hours. And then they went through an exam. They had to pass it with a score not less than 80%. And within the coming few days, or maybe a couple of weeks maximum, we'll be announcing our first IR registry. So now everybody who has the title IR officer in the Egyptian capital market has to get this license from the Egyptian Exchange.
Great, that's great to see. If I can please ask the organizers to close the poll and showcase the results of the poll, just to get, okay, great. So 56% think that the growth of AI technology will augment career growth for IR professionals within the industry. 31% think that will disrupt, and only 11% think that there will be no change. So I think the audience all agrees that there is change is imminent, and change is happening as we speak, particularly in terms of AI technologies and adoption. So just to conclude and wrap up our discussion today for the panel, there are common themes that have emerged from our discussion today, which is, as we're venturing into the next quarters, leaders can expect that the adoption of AI investor relations to continue its upward trend with a clear focus on deepening shareholder engagement. The melding of verified data and AI will provide unprecedented opportunities to transform the communication landscape between companies and their shareholders, both institutional and individuals, creating bespoke and efficient and proactive communications at scale. We heard from our subject matters expert today, as it's clear that this paradigm shift will not only streamline the IR operations, but will also add a layer of authenticity to investor relations if used carefully, fostering a sense of community engagement among shareholders and the companies they invest in. The future of IR is digital, it's bespoke, and it's happening now. We're looking at a new wave of investor relations that's more engaging, transparent, and responsive than ever before. However, this also garners greater attention when it comes to ethical considerations and regulatory oversight. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's panel discussion, and I'd just like to ask you for a great applaud for our panelists today. Thank you.